Sounds good.
I just want to briefly introduce Peter Stevens. He's an executive, a coach, an author, and a Scrum trainer. He's either the founder or co-founder of Scrum Ambassadors and agileexecs.org, agileexecutives.org, the World Agility Forum. And he's recently served as Chief Agility Officer at the Vivior AG, which is a Swiss digital health startup company. And without further ado, let's hear from Peter about, oh, wait a minute. I got to say one more thing before we start. Peter has recently written a book on personal agility, along with Marie Madarelli, right?
Yes, yes.
Yep. And so
okay.
That's
and you received it. I'm thrilled.
Thrilled too. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So what I would like to do is I'm going to put a link in the chat, which is kind of a Mentimeter quick poll. And it's going to be a little bit about getting to know each other. It's going to ask a couple questions about kind of how is life at work and who you are and where you're from. And hopefully it won't take too long. And so I'd like to invite you to do that, and we'll look at it for a moment. And during that time, I'll say a couple words about myself that Nancy hasn't already said. So basically, I think you heard the story. I'm originally from the US. I went to work for this little company called Microsoft in Seattle. You may have heard of them. They've gotten a little bit bigger in the meantime. And I came to Switzerland in 1985. Actually, I came to Germany in 1985 and thought it might be nice to stay here for a year or two. And I looked for jobs in various countries, and I found one in Zurich. I also, as Nancy pointed out, met a young lady in Zurich, and well, here I am. So I discovered agility back in 1993, kind of, before Scrum had really been invented. I was in a project where I got to apply all of the patterns of Scrum. And then about 10 or 12 years after that, I read this book called Agile Project Management with Scrum by a guy named Schwaber from the Boston area. And I was hooked, finally a way of organizing people that made sense. And I never really looked back. Okay. And so I've been here. I've either been active as an Agile coach or an Agile trainer ever since. I became a certified Scrum trainer in 2012. And the personal agility voyage starts around 2016 when I realized my business is doing fine, but I'm working like crazy. And there's got to be something else. There's got to be more to this. And so I started asking questions about, kind of, well, how do I organize myself? And they became questions about how do I spend my time? And led me to, how should I say, create a more abstract understanding of agility, which I'm going to share with you today. So today, besides Scrum training in my coaching business, companies come to me when they realize that their initiatives are stuck and they're not moving and they want things to move forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about how and why that happens today. So you've seen my personal agility book. I've also written about agile contracting. I had the honor of hosting Joe Justice for his first training on what we now call Scrum for Hardware in Europe, in Switzerland, and I wrote down the patterns of extreme manufacturing. And what I'm looking at now is what I call the unstoppable program. Kind of, how do we get things moving in an organization where things are kind of stuck? So let's see how we're doing. I need to go over to the presentation, and we got a couple of people who are responding. How many people do we have in the room today, by the way? Let's look at the participants. Okay, so there are 30 people who are participating, and we've only got about 8 or 9 entries on the Mentimeter up till now. So what I'd like to do is invite you. I think we'll come back to that in a minute.
How do we
because
get
I think,
Peter?
So there are 2 things you can do. So I pasted the link into the chat. Okay, and you can also, can you see my screen? Maybe that's a question. Hold on a second. I seem to have lost the screen share. Okay, the other thing you can do is you can scan the QR code in your phone. And let me just double check the chat. Yes, and so yes, and so there's the Mentimeter. Okay, somebody has repasted that. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see how. So I'm gonna come back. So I'll kind of do the introduction, and we'll come back to that in a minute. In fact, we're going to skip over this because we're going to come back to that in a minute. So what I'd like to do is kind of zoom in a bit on what is the purpose of leadership. And I've like most of you, I'm on LinkedIn. I see the things that they write, and to me, a lot of the stuff that's written about leadership and what it means to be a good leader, it feels kind of like the wellness area in the fitness park. You've got the devices where you can go out and do some work, but then there's also the swimming pool with the hot baths, and it makes you feel good. And I don't know, just a lot of what I've read about leadership just doesn't feel very actionable. And so I think when we get down to it, when we look at, companies exist for a reason. Okay, they exist to do something. Okay, and so for me, the first goal of a leader, or the first purpose of a leader, is to enable the people in that company to achieve long-term goals together. Okay, we've got some sort of complex problem. In software, this is usually creating some kind of product, but it could be anything else depending on the context that you're in. So together, we want to achieve long-term goals. And the other thing is, together, we need to respond to new information. Okay, and one of the things I've noticed is that these are very challenging for most companies. If we look at projects that go way over budget, that arrive late and don't meet their goals, or we talk about so-called technical successes that aren't market successes, we see that enabling, achieving goals is a hard thing to do. And then we look at companies. One of the things I do in my Scrum classes is I ask people to create an impediments backlog. What is your biggest impediment? First of all, what's your most important goal? What's making it difficult to achieve this goal? Why should we fix it now? And how long have you had that goal? And what happens over and over and over is, these impediments, they're years old. And in fact, I recently had in one class, vice president said, we identified these things 5 years ago, okay? And we haven't been able to to actually respond to that, okay? So this is, I think a very, very challenging problem. And so I want to look a little bit into how we can solve it. And for me, the magic word here is alignment, okay? And we're going to look at alignment at 2 levels. So you've heard of the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions. So what does alignment mean at the individual level? Well, it's, kind of what is your purpose? What do you really care about? And how do you align what you do with what you really care about? Then we take it to the context of the larger organization. How do we get, align the actions of a group of people so that we're all pulling in the same direction? Okay. And then finally, what we'll see is agility, the way it's practiced, it both enables leadership and it requires leadership at all levels of the organization. Okay, so I'm going to try to show you how that works as well. So let's see if we've got enough answers from the Mentimeter that we can look at those answers. 1 second here. Okay, so we're up to 17. So this is not quite half, but I'm from Washington D.C. and so we called this close enough for government work. So just 1 second while I align the. So I'm going to share the screen. And okay. So what we're looking at here, I used to start with the easy questions first, but then we didn't get to the hard questions. So this time I started with the hard questions first. And so we talk about purpose, alignment, multitasking, or whether you can focus. Decisiveness is about whether your company is able to identify and fix impediments to progress. Achievement is about whether you can get things done. And job satisfaction is, well, this is about how you feel at work. So if you were Oh, by the way, you'll notice this is on a 0 to 10 scale, kind of like a net promoter score. So up here we see that people are really enthusiastic about how well they can work. Here they're satisfied, nothing to write home about, but nothing to complain about. And everything from 6 on down is we've got some issues. And in fact, we got some people who are seriously unhappy with their current status. And so notice, we're seeing average scores between 5 and 6. Our ability to fix impediments. Remember that impediments dashboard that was, everything is 2 years old. This is actually very, 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 very typical. I would even call this a bit one of the harsher judgments that I've seen since I started asking these questions. Okay, and each one of these things maps to something that we can do to start improving our situation. Okay, so like for instance, the impediments to progress are resolved quickly. We can fix that by creating an impediments backlog and getting leadership and having leadership pay attention to it so that it escalates if necessary, not just at the team level, but at the department level or all the way up to the board level, if that need be. Okay, and so we can use this as an assessment to understand where our companies need improvement. So let's go on to the next question. So this is about me working personally, okay? And so now we got the question, how effective is our organization? Okay, we can integrate customer wishes quickly into our product or services. I just had an argument with this from an organization that you would have expected to be agile, and they said, no, we can't possibly handle this request because we have our goals and deadlines for the next year and a half, and we're working to that goal. Do you have open doors to your customers? Okay, if the answer to this question is, well, not really, then it's really hard to get good feedback about what's going to improve your product. Okay, and notice how these problems kind of go hand in hand. If we're not able to bring out products and services quickly enough, if our products aren't appreciated, we have we have a lot of challenges here. Now, interestingly enough, this last question, this is about technical quality. This is about kind of the traditional things that agile software development addresses. And here we're actually relatively strong. It's the market challenges which are proving difficult for us. So let's take this a step further. So meetings. Wow, you guys spend a lot of time in meetings. Okay. What this is saying is that on average, we are spending 57% of our time. So out of 40 hours, that's 22 hours a week. And some people are up around 80% of their time. Okay. Now, if you spend all your time in meetings, when are you going to do any work? That might be kind of an embarrassing question. Okay. And I actually believe, when we talk about, wanting to improve organizational performance, I think meetings, yeah, there are good meetings out there, but notice this is very interesting. We're saying that a very high percentage of our meetings are a good use of our time. Okay. We're a bit less enthusiastic about our recurring meetings. But notice, even if they're a good use of our time, they're a very, very expensive way of organizing ourselves. And I think one of the challenges, if we look at the layoffs that happened at, the approach that was taken at Twitter, where Elon Musk basically said, half of the people aren't producing anything. Okay, let's get rid of them. Now, how he did it was a disaster, and I'm not sure that Twitter is going to survive that. But notice that Twitter did not fall apart, the week after he fired everyone, because the talking classes, well, they weren't really contributing any value. Okay, and so I think there's a lot of potential here to improve profitability. Not just improving profitability, but we have a lot of power, potential in our staff that's not being realized, that's being wasted. Okay, I had a conversation just today looking at, if you work for a major consulting company, how much are they going to charge for your time? The answer I got was $3,000. How much of that are they willing to give you? The answer I got was $1,000 per day. Okay, why do we have this huge markup? Well, they have to pay for all of the non-value producing people, okay? And that actually matches pretty well to 40% productive and 60% doing the talking, and that leaves $500 for actual profitability. So there's a lot of how shall I say, wasted potential here, which could be used more effectively. Okay, so this is a measure of the depth of the organization. Okay, and so this actually doesn't look too bad. So we're looking at about 3.5 levels above us and half a level below. That points to 4 people. What I didn't ask and need to ask here is how many people are in the company, because you can relate that. This is kind of like the body mass index of a company. Is, you know, how many levels of management do we have versus how many people do we have? And finally, let's see about who's in the room. So what we're seeing is we have senior contributors. We don't have any actual normal contributors, okay? So probably 60% of the companies are not represented. Single team managers and multi-team managers seem very well represented. And we have this question mark about someone else. So notice these numbers here, they bias a bit towards management, and the higher you get, the more time you spend in meetings. You know, but they're pointing to, I'd say, a lot of potential for improvement. So, oh, and last question, where is everyone? Looks like vast majority is from the Boston area, and a couple, I don't know, that looks like, who's from, is this like, oh, wait, you got San Francisco, this looks like California, this looks like, I don't know, maybe Tennessee or Georgia. Why don't you put in the chat where you guys are hailing from? And let's see what, let's see where everyone is from. So just, you know, put your name in the chat and say hi. And let's go back to the substance of our talk while we're at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump back and talk about what does it mean to have an effective company. And so notice the internal view. Purpose is clear. Our leaders are aligned. People can focus. Issues get resolved. People can accomplish their objectives. Okay, these are kind of measurable criteria. From the external side, responsive to customer needs, we have access to our customers and we can bring out new products and services frequently. And of course, we get bonus points if the customers actually want them, and we get bonus points if they work. Okay. And finally, I didn't
Peter,
really
we're
ask.
still on the. We're sorry to interrupt. We're still on the map. I don't know if you meant to change back to your slide.
Oh dear. Oh, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's go back to, yes. So what is an effective company? And so you see here, you know, we've got the internal view, then we've got the external view. And really the interesting question is, what is the impact that we want to have? Okay. You know, and I think that that's what distinguishes companies. I don't think anybody does this better than Musk right now. Musk does a lot of things badly, but one of the things he's good at is the vision thing. You know, with Tesla being about, you know, catalyzing a change to sustainable energy, and SpaceX being about making humanity multiplanetary. You can say them in you know 3 words, and everyone understands what they're about. Now, coming back to Twitter, I have no clue what Twitter is about, which is, I think, one of the reasons why that's proving to be so difficult for him. Okay, so let's go on to this alignment thing. And let's start to talk about kind of what is personal agility and where does personal agility start from? And personal agility starts with a very simple observation. Time is your most precious currency. Okay, you only get to spend it once. I'd like to point out that you have to spend it. Okay, so you know you don't really have any choice about spending it or not. And so the question is not are you going to spend it, but how are you going to spend it? Okay, and you have lots of choices here. Okay, you can spend them at work. Even within work, you've got lots of choices about how you can spend it. You know, you've got maybe more personal goals or more Zen goals or self-realization goals. And of course, you know, there's kind of that whole work-life balance thing. So the basic question from personal agility is, well, what if you could spend more of your time on things that you care about, on things that are important for whatever reason, and less of your time on things that you don't? Okay, and so one of our key metaphors is the notion that, well, life is like an ocean. You've got this huge sea out there. You don't know where you are, unless it can be very, very difficult to tell where you are in life and where you're going in life. And so how do you know? Okay. And this is where the question, what really matters, starts to come into play. If you know what really matters, you can start to answer questions about where you are and where you're going and decide, am I going where I want to go? So let's look at how that works. So the metaphor is basically navigation. Okay, so I'd like you to imagine you're on a trip. You're sailing, in the age of sail, before there was GPS and satellites and all that fun stuff. And you say, well, we're starting on the west coast of Europe and we want to head to a Caribbean island, okay, which in this case we're calling Jamaica. So the first question is, where am I? Now, today, you pull out your GPS and it would tell you to a tolerance of a few meters, where you are, but back in the day, what alternatives did you have? Well, you could, at night, you could look at the North Star and that would tell you your latitude. And, when the sun comes up or goes down, if you have an accurate clock, you can figure out your longitude. And on the basis of that, you can point yourself on the map and say, we are here. Okay, and that gives you your position. And so what do? Well, the next day, you do the same thing. Okay, and that tells you, you see where you're going. Okay, so it's this notion, we call this the breadcrumb trail, which is basically telling you where, at the same time, is predicting where you're going to go. Now notice, I had a picture of that boat in a storm, and in the middle of that storm, well, you might have other priorities besides navigation. The waves are big compared to the boat, and you've got urgent things to do, which have to do with keeping the boat afloat. So you might drift off course. Okay, so, the next time you take a fix, you see, we have drifted off course. So wait a minute, where is Jamaica? Where do I want to go? Now, notice, personal agility doesn't tell you where you want to go. It doesn't tell you who you want to be. But once you've figured out who you want to be or where you want to go, it then helps you get there. Okay, and how we do that is actually pretty simple. 6 questions. 6 questions to change your life. We start with the first question, what really matters? Now, if you know the answer to that question, that can be very helpful for evaluating the answers to the next questions. If you don't know the answer, well, just skip it and come back to it later, because the answers to the next questions will give you some indications as to what really matters. So the next question is, what did you do? Okay, so think of that metaphor of the boat and its breadcrumb trail. Remember we said time is your most valuable currency? Well, looking at what you did tells you what was important to you or what is important to you. Okay, and at the same time, looking at what you could do moving forward. And in fact, you can actually do this with your calendar, especially if you've got a lot of meetings. You can look at, well, what are the meetings that I went to, and what did I do, and how do they connect to what really matters? Because they're telling you what you spent your time on, and what you're planning to do moving forward is telling you what you'd like to spend your time on, or maybe what you have to spend your time on, or maybe what someone else wants you to spend your time on. Okay, now how you phrase that question, what do I want to do, what do I, that tells you a lot about to what extent you feel in control of your life and how you feel about what you're doing. Okay, now of all those things that you could do, and chances are you've got too many things to do, well, now we can start to do a triage. What's important, what's urgent, and what's going to make you happy. Okay, and by the way, that what's going to make you happy is always an important question to ask, for the simple reason that if you don't do things that make you happy, sooner or later you're probably going to burn out because you feel like you're doing things for other people, and you start to ask yourself, what is the point? So now we've got this, this list of things we could do. We've done some triage about, kind of what's important or what's not. Now, the first time through, this is where you might want to start to look for patterns in what you consider to be important. Okay, either looking forward or looking backward, and kind of group them into categories. Okay, and these categories give you your first answer to what really matters. Now, it might not be the definitive answer, and you might iterate on the answer a bit, but it's telling you what you consider to be important and what you, in the last week, and what you consider important moving forward. And then finally, of all those things, well, what are the ones that you really want to get done? Okay, and so the idea is you got too much to do. Most likely you have too much to do. Okay, so if you only get one or two things done, what would you like them to be? Okay, and that's what you want to focus on. Now, you'll notice that's only 5 questions. The 6th question is kind of a placeholder for questions to get you unstuck. Who can help? Okay, and you might actually ask that person for help. You might just say, what would Nancy do in this case? Okay, or what would Barack Obama or Tom Cruise do? And so, you kind of take a different perspective. Okay, and so the idea is, when you're stuck, well, that person might actually be someone who can help you. Now, this isn't about delegation. This is about, as I say, asking for help. So we have these 6 questions. Okay, and so the idea is, navigation, you take a fix, where am I? Okay, we call this process celebrate and choose. The process of saying, where am I? That's looking at what you did last week. That's looking at your breadcrumb trail and saying, you are here. Recognizing what you did, giving yourself a pat on the back for what you got done. Okay, and then you can look forward, and that triage process and kind of narrowing that down into what you really want to focus on, we call that choosing. Okay, now in Scrum, they use the term sprint review and sprint planning, okay, which is kind of about the external control. Whereas the idea here is that it's your life, it's your boat, you're in control of it. So celebrate what you got done, choose what you'd like to do moving forward. Okay, and so the idea is last week you were somebody, you got some stuff done. Okay, this week you're going to do some more stuff, and that should take you a step closer to who you want to be or what you want to get done. Okay, and this simple approach, and by the way, there are a couple of tools for visualizing this. So we have a long-term planning tool called the forces map. If you're familiar with story maps, it's a very similar concept. And we have more of a tactical planning tool called the priorities map, which is kind of an upgrade of a Kanban board. So, we have an additional column, the what really matters column, which is like an information radiator to remind you what you really care about. Okay, and so basically the priorities map lets you connect. We label everything, we color code everything, so it lets you connect what is the task at hand to why it's important. Okay, and that makes it easier to do this triage, so you can select and narrow down to what do I want to get done this week, and even what do I want to get done today. So personal agility, in my eyes, it opens all kinds of doors to change and transformation. We start with the basic principles that we see in most agile frameworks, but we apply them in a very simple and scalable way. The first is clarity of purpose, this concept of what really matters. Then we have navigation. Where am I? Where am I going? Where do I want to be going? Cadence. Okay, so doing things at regular intervals, preferably with an eye towards tangible or concrete results. Then we have visualization, which we've shown through the tools. And then finally, did you notice how personal agility wasn't framed in terms of things to do? It was framed in terms of questions to ask. Okay, and so this is the basis of dialogue. We used to call these coaching skills, but not everybody who uses these skills is going to be a coach. Okay, some of them will, but there are many other things that you might want to do where you can still use these skills. And so on the one hand, it's powerful questions to kind of, for problem solving and eliciting new information, but it's also facilitation, which becomes important when you start working with groups. Because if you try to coach a group, it doesn't work very well. You need to structure the conversations of a larger group, okay? And so we've seen, I started applying this in 2016. We started sharing it in 2017. Around 2018, we started seeing people were sharing their successes with us. I remember my first email that said, hey, this really works. And so we have students in Sri Lanka We have coaches and entrepreneurs around the world. We have, CEOs of startups, and we have people, individuals who are just struggling to keep their heads afloat, and deal with toxic issues in their lives. And they've been able to turn their lives around completely. And I think Lisa Adkins is a reference that goes without further introduction. Okay, so this is, if you will, everything I've talked about up till now is the individual level of personal agility. Now, what I'd like to do is maybe take a quick look at the chat. My mouse disappeared. There it is. Let's take a quick look at the chat. Do we have any questions coming in through the chat? Oh, we got people coming from all sorts of interesting places. Boston. Lots of Boston. South Carolina. I thought that was a South Carolina. Connecticut, Silicon Valley. Oh, cool. Okay. So are there any questions, or shall I move on? Okay, no one's jumping out at me. So what is an example of task and importance? Okay, so what's an example of a task? Well, very simple task: pay my bills this month, send my invoices this month. Those are kind of routine tasks that I have to do every month. Write a blog entry. They're all about things that you want to get done. What is the importance? Well, for me, the importance is about why they're important and why they're important now. Okay, so I find it not very helpful to categorize things by most important, less important, not important, because those are decisions I take in the moment. But at the moment I write them down, but when I actually get to the point of doing them, it's more about why. Okay, and why do I want to do this task now? Okay, so what I try to do, you can kind of see this in the example here. Let's go back for a second. Okay, so here you can, I'm not sure if you can read these examples. Okay, so this is from Maria's task board. Okay, so she's got things like, some of them are quite trivial, like set up her Fitbit, find a trainer, launch her online training program. These are things that require attention fairly soon. If she doesn't do them quickly, something bad is going to happen. Health and fitness, this looks more like a reminder, something that she wants to do every night. Okay, so you can use these as, sometimes these are more information radiators, and sometimes these are tasks that really move, from left to right. This is basically, these columns are used for triage. This is the waiting column. This is, if you will, the in progress column, and not shown is the done column. Okay, and I haven't shown, there's actually another tool which I haven't shown here, which is the breadcrumb trail. So when things are done, rather than throw them away, what we suggest you do is keep track of them kind of one column at a time, because they basically tell you where you're coming from. So for instance, if you say, I want to focus more on my health and fitness, then, okay, well, what are you doing that's related to health and fitness? And if you look at your breadcrumb trail and there's nothing in there about health and fitness, or not as much as you think there should be, this enables you to kind of coach yourself and say, oh, I wanted to do something about my health and fitness. Okay. But I'm not doing anything about my health and fitness. So the next time you go through your celebrate and choose process, you're going to, prioritize things more that are related to your fitness. Okay, so we're getting a lot of questions here. Whose questions are these? Sherry, are these from you? Or are you just keeping a protocol here?
I think it looks like Sherry's typing them in, and I'm not sure if Sherry's generating them herself or people are feeding them to her. I'm not quite sure. Okay.
So are these questions, because I feel like I just answered that question. Okay, so the difference between a force and a priority. Okay, so forces, these things that really matter are the forces on your life. Okay, and so you'll notice that, so here, for Maria, she's got, this is kind of a medium to long-term planning. So these are things that she could do related to health and fitness. DJing was a major source of happiness in her life. Sustainable business was a priority in her life. Okay, so there's kind of a triage that happens. We pull from the possibilities column into the this week column. Okay, and then we're going to pull from, and that's kind of the celebrate and choose of all the possibilities that I have. What do I want to do this week? Okay, and so the idea is things move from possibilities into this week, then from this week to today, and then from today to done. Okay, and so today is really, what do I want to focus on? When I get distracted, what do I want to come back to? Okay, and so the idea is to help you, disturbances happen, the telephone rings, the customer calls, your kids have skin knees, all these things happen. Okay, so you hit a distraction, you deal with the distraction, you deal with the interruption. What do you want to come back to? Okay, and that's what the today card is about. Okay, so the forces map. Now notice, the problem, it's the same problem in Scrum. The backlog gets too long, you kind of lose the perspective. Okay, so the idea is your ideas of things that you could do, they come into the forces map. Okay, and then your top priority items from the forces map will replenish the possibilities column as the possibilities column empties. That's the basic idea of how it works. Okay, so do we cover the questions? Okay, now part of the where does it tell you why is notice how notice how we've got this in the what really matters column, we have an item health and fitness. Okay, and you'll notice it's color coded in blue or light blue. And then here we have various things that she could do, like run on the beach or locate a gym or track sleep on her Fitbit, etc. And these are all things that relate to health and fitness. So what we do is we use the color coding to map what you could do with why it's important. Okay, and so the idea is that's a shorthand for, we say do something for someone to serve a purpose that matters. And this is basically, this is a shorthand for connecting a particular task with something that matters. Yeah, and Terry's got this right. The forces map is generally organized by, the different categories of priority in your life. And they're generally sorted, most important first, or what you want to do next first. Okay, so it's a way of managing your backlog when your backlog gets too big. Okay, yes, and it's very similar to Kanban, the priorities map. One of the big differences is our approach to work in progress. Kanban says limit your work in progress. We're more about trying to limit your possibilities than your work in progress. And it's more about, because at an individual level, we're subject to interruptions, and that's just a fact of life. Limiting work in progress at that level is a bit artificial. So the idea is to say, let's focus in on, what are the 2 or 3 things that we really want to get done today? Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'm getting kind of overwhelmed by the chat. So I think what I'd like to do is hold on questions until we go through the second part, and then we'll come back to the questions.
And Peter, I'll try to herd the questions up in a batch so that when you're ready, hopefully I can quiz you. Okay.
Okay. So, yeah. So let's, so we talk about the basic skills: purpose, navigation, cadence, visualization, and dialogue. Okay. And we've got the, plenty of cases, and that's, the book is a combination, by the way, of, kind of how it works, why it works, and case studies of people for whom it worked for them. Okay, so now let's talk about how we can use these skills to create alignment and create this shared sense of what really matters, in a team or in an organization. Okay, and really the key here is dialogue. Okay, and I think this is where personal agility is really different than, say, personal Kanban or Scrum, because personal agility isn't a process, it's an approach to dialogue. Okay, and the dialogue skills, especially powerful questions, are really at the heart of how it works. And I think, one of the first benefits that people started reporting is they were kinder to themselves. Okay, today I would say the words I would use is they have more empathy with themselves. They understand what they're thinking and doing, and they see the big pictures of their lives. And it makes it easier for them to be less hard on themselves, which for a lot of people is a big deal. Now, it turns out empathy, if you want people to listen to you, empathizing with them and understanding them is actually the first step. And so how do you do that? Well, what does empathy mean? Okay. And, empathy can be, oh, wait a minute, we're getting into emotions. I'm not sure if we do that in our company here, but let's talk about something real concrete, almost like a working agreement. I listen to you, you listen to me, and we care about what the other person is saying. Okay. And notice how I start by listening to you. Okay. And so I'm going to ask you powerful questions to understand your situation. And then I'm going to listen to you, and then I'm going to make sure that I've understood you kind of before I go on to the next question. I'm going to get that confirmation. Yep. Have I understood you? Yep. Is this correct? Yep. Is there anything else? Oh, wait a minute. There's E. Ah, yes. You said A, B, and C, and now there's E. Okay. A, B, C, E. Is there anything else? No, that's it. Ah, okay. Well, in my experience, we also need to take a look at F. The other person says, ah, we have to take a look at F. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. And so notice, once the person has felt like they've said what they need to say, that's where the willingness is present to listen. Okay. And this, and we actually recommend a process for this. So a lot of the kind of the second level of personal agility is, catalogs of questions that you can use to help you through a particular situation. And one of the most important is building empathy with your stakeholder. And so we start with, kind of who are you? Okay, notice we don't start with why, we start with who, because everyone loves to talk to themselves or talk about themselves. And this is where they feel appreciated. Then we go to the question of why are we here and what are we trying to accomplish? Okay. Then we start looking at what's making the situation challenging. Okay. And so we have kind of the objective level. What are the challenges of developing this particular product? Okay. But then we move on to more emotional things. What are you concerned about, or what are you afraid of? Now, exactly how you phrase this kind of depends. Who you're talking to, and my experience is if you talk to the C-level, they're never afraid of anything, and they've got everything under control. But there are still things that give them tummy aches or keep them awake at night. Okay, and so exactly how you phrase these things, but you're trying to hear, fears is about emotions moving forward, and frustrations is about emotions looking backwards. Okay. And okay, so now we've got the picture. What's the outcome that we're trying to achieve? Okay, and you're getting them to tell you a story about where they want to go. And then finally, what help would be helpful? How can I help you achieve this goal? Now, I say you can use this with any stakeholder. I've used this with the board of directors, and I used it with my family as we were contemplating a major transition for my mother, who's kind of getting on in years. Okay, and so this basic approach of listen before you talk, ask before you tell. Here we're collecting lots of information. Okay. Oh, and by the way, last question is always, what's next? What do we do next? Sometimes you'll be explaining what happens next. Sometimes you'll be asking what happens next. That depends a bit on the relationship. Okay, but this process of listening to each other, this creates the first level of empathy, and it creates a level of trust. And what you're starting to do is create what I call bilateral alignment. Okay, we have talked to each other about what really matters, and we understand, at least, and agree on what the other person considers to be important. We might not have agreed on the overall what really matters, but we've started to understand each other. And then what you do is you repeat this process for all of the stakeholders. So like I did this, what I was doing was doing this with the board. We talked to the board members, we talked to the members of the executive board, and kind of understood everyone's perspective. When I did this with the family, I talked to my sister, then I talked to my mother. Okay, and we got this. I was able to see the big picture. And then what you can do is you can facilitate what I'll call multilateral alignment. You bring the people together and say, okay, this is kind of what I've heard that are in common. These are things that everyone has in concern. Here are some areas where we don't have agreement yet, but we see a need to work on them. Or here are the things we're going to reframe our conflict, not as conflict, but as things we need to work on or things we need to find solutions to. And so what this level of alignment allows you to do is define a shared purpose, and this enables you to take decisions. Okay, and remember we talked about, the purpose is to achieve a goal together. Well, this decisiveness is kind of the first step that we say, this is where we're going. And you've really got the whole organization behind you, be that the whole family, be that your whole executive board, whoever. Once you get started, now we start doing these things in cadence, what we call celebrate and choose. And this is where the stakeholders kind of sync up with each other, confirm that they're still aligned, process new information so that they can take the next step moving forward. Okay, and so personal agility for me, really it started out with at the individual level, what we call the personal agility system, that I can, orient my actions either in a personal context or professional context, both, so that I can act and do more of what really matters. And what emerged from that is what we could now call the personal agility alignment process, this process of creating alignment around what really matters, so that as a group, we can take decisions that we can really hold. Okay, so how does this all add up together? So, we talked about the definition of leadership, achieving long-term goals and reacting to new information together. And we've talked about, the importance of alignment. And alignment for me, when I look in the business world, I think alignment is something like the Holy Grail. And this article is from 2012. And I don't think things have changed very much. Organizations are often not aligned. People don't understand what the strategy is. And the success rate on organizations trying to change themselves is actually very low. I think it's gotten a little bit better than that with the Agile movement, but they talk about only 20% of Agile transformations can be considered successful. Well, that's twice as good as it was before, so we'll say the glass is half full, but there's still a lot of improvement potential there. Okay, so how is, we talk about wanting to be able to respond to change. Now, when we talk about leadership, we talk about command and control, or as the military calls it, directive command and control. This is, stand up, left face, forward march, the soldiers salute, say yes, sir, and off they go. And so, if you want to march your soldiers from here to Gettysburg, that works wonderfully, okay? Except, well, there are two problems with it. What happens if you have resistance on the way to Gettysburg? What happens if you have unforeseen situations? Well, the problem is if you're just telling people what to do, they don't have the knowledge to be able to react to new information. So what do? They have to go back to the commander or the manager or whoever, and that, to get clarification. And so what that does is first of all, it turns your management and your leadership into bottlenecks because they have to keep answering these questions. And it can degenerate into micromanagement, and it can degenerate into a situation of chronic distrust where, the people say, oh God, my team, they're like children. I have to give them directions every single day. Otherwise they just screw up. Okay. Now, we talked about the problem of getting from here to Gettysburg if we run into resistance along the way. And this is where actually the US military, I think, has really taken a leadership role. And we discovered this and the impact of this as we were doing our case studies. They use a thing called Mission Command to basically, they train everybody all the way down to the simple soldier. Who's basically, coming more or less out of high school. They train them on leadership. They train them to see the big picture. They train them to ask questions so that when you go into a mission briefing, you're not just simply told what to do. You're saying, okay, well, this mission is part of a bigger operation, and your immediate goal is to get here, but that's setting up a larger perspective to get there. And what that means for this. And so the soldiers, they'll ask questions and they'll make sure that they understand the big picture. And one of the interesting side effects of that is if they ever need to, everybody in that unit is trained to take command of that unit should the need arise. Okay. And they also have their very strict military rank so that they don't fight over it if this happens in a conflict situation. Okay. So basically everybody understands the big picture. And what you get out of that is aligned purpose. Okay. The flock of birds flies in the same direction, even though there's no one bird controlling. And in fact, if you look at flocks of birds, they actually trade off who's at the lead position simply because that's the position that's the most work. It's the most tiring. It's easier to fly backwards or further back in formation. Okay, so how does this apply? What does this have to do with agile transformation? Well, what really got my attention, I'm sure you're familiar with Turn the Boat Around or Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet. And he explained his situation as he had been training to take command of a particular ship in the US Navy. And then and the captain is expected to know more about that ship than anyone else on board. And so they literally train for the ship, for over a year. He had to take over command of a different ship where he had no clue on very short notice. Okay. And so he found himself being actually low knowledge. Okay. Now, that's kind of an interesting question. Who do you give command to? Okay. And one of the criteria is having high knowledge. Another criteria is kind of caring about the big picture and the overall mission. And another criteria is that they trust you to do the right thing in the context of the overall mission and the big picture and the interests of the country. Okay. And so basically, someone who's in a high knowledge state is an obvious candidate to be given command. Okay. So far, so good. Now, what is the opposite of, if someone is leading and someone is telling? Well, what happens if the person who's giving orders and instructions doesn't have high knowledge? Okay. That kind of generally goes to a bad place. You get silly commands that make no sense. If you're out on the high seas, it could be downright dangerous. Okay, so it's generally frowned upon. And this was actually Marquet's challenge. He says, hey, I don't know much about this boat, but I've still been entrusted with the power of command. What do I do? And his solution was, well, what's at the other end of tell? Okay. Now, in command and control, the assumption is, the person at the other end is expected to be a good follower. So the idea is, the soldiers should do what they're told. Except that leads to compliance, not to create a thought, and that can actually be very dangerous. And what he needed to do for his situation was, because he was in low knowledge, he says, well, I need to ask, because asking, that takes me to a position of high knowledge. And it turns out, I don't know if you've run into leaders of an agile transformation and they say, oh, no, I can't trust my staff. Well, that's because they've always been told what to do and they've never been even allowed to see the big picture. So what I'm thinking is that the solution to this problem is to reframe the role of someone who is not in a leadership position, someone who is in a position of innocence, is to encourage people to ask questions. Because this asking questions, this dialogue, this is what takes you to a state of higher knowledge. And this is what takes you to a state where you are trusted to see and care about the big picture. In other words, it brings the people doing the work closer to the people asking for the work. Okay. And I think that this, much like, in the case of the military that needs to be extremely responsive in battle, our organizations that are trying to deal with a more and more complex world, what they need is engagement and caring about the big picture at all levels of the organization. And in fact, if we look at how Scrum works, Scrum is basically is a civilian implementation of mission command. Okay, so basically, what I think we're getting is a way to take away the fear of change, to take away the fear of our staff. We have these basic tools: purpose, navigation, cadence, visualization, and dialogue, and they lead us into a position of leadership. Okay, Now, one last thing which I'd like to share with you, and then we'll go to questions if we have time. First of all, the book is out there on Amazon. The book tells you, basically explains the why and the how. We got downloads for all the information and things like the priorities map and the forces map. The price in Amazon is now under $10. The other thing is, we're starting our first iteration of the leadership development program. Okay, and this is basically a 6-month program, total of about 60 contact hours. It starts with some intensive, let's get into how these things work, and then we move on to kind of going into homeopathic doses so you can apply it in real life. Okay, and so the first module is working with yourself. The second module is working with others. And the third module is then, how do you take that to your team or organization? Okay. Now, we expect that this is going to be, that the value of this and the list price of this, and when we offer this to companies, it's going to be about $5,000 per person. We're offering that for, 5,000 Swiss francs, which is a little bit more than $1. We're offering that for just under 1,000 to get started. So, if you're interested in this, you can basically follow this link, go to the bottom of the page. You can place a deposit. The deposit is refundable. As soon as we get enough people to properly fill a cohort, Maria and I are going to start the first cohort. So, kind of now is your chance. Okay. And so with that, I want to say thank you very much. I think we'll move on to questions now. And Nancy, what's the next step?
There's a bunch of questions this is Maggie. There's a bunch of questions summarized by Terry and towards the end of the chat. If you want to scroll through and see, in the interest of time, I think a couple people might have to drop at 1 o'clock here. Okay. Well, I did kind of, step on the gas a bit to get to the end. Sherry, maybe you'd like to point out to the first question.
So, and Peter, I'm one of those people that are going to have to drop off, but it's kind of a large section, but it's mostly around the maps, the priority and the force map. And so some of it was how do you decide what subset of forces to put on into possibilities? Like, what's the kind of decision process? Maybe is where Philip asked. And then, do you see where that section is now that I'm reading it? And then I believe this is a question from Sherry, but it also might be notes. She was doing an awesome job. Is where do these maps tell why, and what does the colored part of the maps mean?
Okay. So if you want to stop the recording, I'll give you a live example, which might be a better way to do it.
Yeah, so we've come back now, and we're going to continue with some more questions. Peter showed us some of his own personal schedule for a few minutes there. So let's continue. People are welcome to put something in the chat or say something, just unmute and talk if you prefer. Any further questions? Okay, someone said still not clear on what goes into possibilities. Is it only things that you think you might do this week?
Okay, so for me, possibilities is kind of, if you were thinking in terms of Scrum, possibilities is like your backlog, okay, the product backlog. And this week is like the forecast for the sprint. Okay, so that's kind of so what you're doing is you're using the celebrate and choose to narrow down the list of things that you want to focus on this week. Okay, the assumption is you got too much to do. Okay, so let's narrow our focus to a couple of things that are important. Okay, and then we kind of process them one after the other. Okay, now I'm assuming, this is Agile New England, so, I'm assuming that you guys know what a product backlog is. I don't like to use the Scrum terminology because people think, oh no, I got to do epics and story points and all that. Oh, and wait a minute, does it have to be Invest compatible? And I say, no, stop. The card, the card on the board is a reminder that you want to do something, and it's a reminder of why it's important to you. And that why it's important to you helps you prioritize and sequence when you want to do it.
Okay, there's another question here. It says, how does that list differ from the full list of forces? I think he means the list of possibilities.
Yeah, so forces is, if you will, again, using some Scrum terminology here, forces is the story map, of all the things that you could put in your backlog, organized as a table to make them more visible. The possibilities column is more like the top of the backlog, the ready queue, stuff that you think you're going to do fairly soon. Okay, so the idea is you get brilliant ideas about things you'd like to do, put them in the forces map. As you work down your possibilities, then you replenish the possibilities column from the forces map. So it's all about triage, really. Okay, and saying, kind of what do you want to focus on?
Okay, the person who asked that says thanks. That makes sense.
Okay, sounds like they're happy with that. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay, someone says,
okay.
on
So
reducing WIP, how do you narrow what's most important in priority?
So that's one of those questions where I would say, how do you do it today? Okay, and it's probably not going to be too different than how you do it today. The personal agility doesn't tell you what your priorities should be or how to set your priorities. It does help you see what you're actually capable of doing, okay, and kind of what's a reasonable expectation for the week. And it helps you reflect on what your priorities are, okay? And so, my experience is, we kind of go through this first celebrate and choose. We take a first cut at what really matters to us. And then we start, kind of using the priorities map to, plan our work for the week and to, decide what to do next. And, and then at some point, something starts to bother you and something starts to gnaw on you and you don't feel quite right. And you see yourself doing stuff that, quote, doesn't matter because it doesn't map to any of your priorities, or one of your priorities isn't getting any time, and this is where you start to realize, oh, wait a minute, something that I thought matters doesn't, and something that wasn't on my radar screen actually does. Okay, and that's, what you do with that information, well, that depends. Okay, you may change your priorities map. You may have to say, oh, wait a minute, well, I know I'm doing a lot of this, but that's actually procrastination, and what I really want to be doing or need to be doing is something else. Okay, and so, the priorities map helps you plan. The breadcrumb trail, taking these things from the done column and moving them into, seeing them on a week by week basis, what's in there. That's basically holding up the mirror and saying, what did you do? And inviting you to reflect on that. Okay. And so, I think, how do you do it is you do it. And then you reflect on how happy you are with your decisions. And, if you're happy with your decisions, then you're good. You've got your priorities. And if not, you can change your decisions.
Okay, I have another question here. Someone said, question, what is an example of a breadcrumb? You mentioned breadcrumbs in the navigation analogy.
Okay. Okay, so think Hansel and Gretel, minus the wolf or minus the birds. Okay, they went into the forest and they said, oh, how do we get out of the forest? So they left a trail of breadcrumbs. Okay, so the breadcrumb trail, these are the tasks that you have completed. Okay, these are the tasks that have gone into the done column, but rather than just throw them away, well, actually, what they do with, I'm actually just switching to Kanban Zone, which I think is a better tool than Trello. It's certainly a much livelier tool than Trello. Trello's gotten a little fat and it's slow and fat in its old age. I do hope, well, anyway, I didn't say that, but never mind. Anyway, so, what you can do is you can basically look at the things that are done, and you can see what you got done on a week by week basis or a month by month basis. And you can look at how they map to what really matters. And you can actually see how your priorities, have changed over time. And so what this does is it gives you an opportunity to reflect on how the year went. If you have some kind of annual review where they set objectives for you at the beginning and you have to show at the end of the year that you've met them, it actually gives you a nice way to visualize what you've actually done. And again, it's kind of it's a way to kind of hold up the mirror and say, am I living my life according to things that matter to me? Am I doing things I care about? Okay, and if you're happy with what you see, then life is good. And if you feel that there's a disconnect between what you'd like to see and what you are seeing, well, what's done is done. You can't change that, but you can always do different things, with your next Celebrate and Choose. Makes it real nice with New Year's resolutions because you just interject the New Year's resolution into your What Really Matters column, and then it just follows very naturally to do it.
I was thinking a little bit about that analogy as you were speaking. I have a question, my own. It sounds to me like people following this would benefit from maybe being part of a small group that's looking to stay on track or get back on track. It seems like there are a lot of possibilities to just sort of drift away from it or get overwhelmed because you populate it too much. Is that part of the benefit that you feel is from the course that you mentioned that you're offering? Yeah.
So, one of the things you do is you come together in a cohort. And what we actually encourage people to do is start by themselves because that's safer. And that's, for instance, if we're working with senior leadership, it's really important to start with yourself because, some people, they don't want to go out into public until they've got a certain amount of confidence with it. Other people are different. They want to start right away. And so we kind of, navigate that. But the idea is, if we go back to Scrum has got 3 roles. Okay, you have the product owner who sets priorities. You've got the team who does the work, and you've got the Scrum Master who basically asks questions. Okay, and the problem is, when it's just you, when we're really doing the personal agility, there's only one person there. We can call them me, myself, and I, but it's still just one person. And what I found, it's very difficult to kind of well, first of all, make yourself stop and stand back and look at the big picture. It's too easy to say, oh, I know what I care about, and you just kind of keep going. And, you do stuff, but you don't do the reflection. And so what I do, I probably do it about I do it a little bit every day, a little bit more once a week, and probably about once a month I do it with my wife. I call her my celebration partner. Okay, I don't call her a coach because she's not a coach, and it's just, but we sit down and we kind of go through and we look at, what's happened, what did I get done, what did I get done that brought me forward, what do I need to be doing, are there any disconnects? We also use that to kind of sync up in the family, so like, we try to do it once a week, although our current schedules don't allow it quite that frequently. But it's a sort of thing of, if we both need the car on Thursday, if we talk about it on Monday, it's much easier to fix that problem than if we discover that Wednesday night or Thursday morning, just because we got more time to find options. So one of the things which we do suggest is working with a celebration coach. You can do this kind of mutually. And I don't like the term accountability partner because it sounds like blame. But doing things together is usually more fun than doing things by yourself. And having an appointment with someone else in your agenda kind of means you're going to do it. Whereas if you just have an appointment with yourself, you may or may not do it. So there's some advantages to having a celebration partner. Another way to do this is in a work context. You might consider doing this with your manager. Except here, your manager isn't the celebration partner. Your manager is not asking you questions. You're asking your manager questions. Remember that vision of leadership, that it starts with asking, and, asking enables you to see the big picture. Well, the idea is that your manager understands the big picture, can set your priorities. So, think of the manager as being kind of in the product owner role of this case, setting the priorities. You're the doer, and you are the Scrum Master asking the question. So, it's okay. It's okay to, and it works fairly well to have 2 of the roles, and then delegate the third one. But you're always the doer of your life. You can never be, you can't delegate the doing. by definition.
Okay.
It's your life, it's your boat.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Peter. I think we've fielded a good little set of questions there. Just
Okay.
want to say thank you to everybody who's attended. We've dwindled down a little bit, but I know some people had other meetings they have to go to. We'll have this as part of the recording. If people want to capture the chat log, now's the time to do that. And we can wrap up the recording now. So thank you,
Okay.
Peter.
Okay, and once again, if anyone wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn for a chat, that would be great. If you would like to buy the book, that would be great too. And if you want to reserve a spot in the leadership development program, this would be the time. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for the invitation and look forward to our next conversation.
Super.